Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope everybody is aboard that wants to be aboard with us here. And I'm sorry for our delay, but we've had some very enriching discussions prior to this panel coming. I'm Sister Faith Colligan. I'm a daughter of charity of St. Vincent de Paul here in Albany, New York. And I'm the social justice coordinator for our sisters here in Albany. And I'm also a member of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious Social Justice Coordinators for New York State also. So that's a little bit about myself. And I just want to highlight some of the principles that this panel is going to be focusing on. And that primarily focuses on labor and wage rights and looking for justice and I would say equity in our labor rights and worker markets. We've learned that or we believe from our faith traditions that the economy exists for the people and not the people for the economy. And that it is immoral for us to steal wages from working people. That people need good working conditions and must not be asked to work unreasonable hours. When employers underpay their workers or worse, engage in wage theft, they effectively ask the government to carry more of the costs for supporting these employees, as they must rely on more and more of the safety net. For example, underpaid workers frequently end up needing SNAP and other types of safety net programs, and that causes deeper subsidies in these programs, making more vulnerable and making some of these poor folks that are dependable more vulnerable because they're unable to actually access some of these safety nets for their living. So in light of some of these principles, I'd just like to introduce some of our panel members, and I'm sure they're going to bring a lot of light on this subject. And I also want to say that I think labor and the labor wages situation certainly is part of what I would echo with Ron Deutsch, that this is really part also of an economic development issue as we enlarge upon what we're looking at as far as labor is concerned. So our first panelist is going to be Joanne Lum. Joanne is the executive director of the National Mobilization Against Sweatshops. And I think Joanne is going to enlarge our understanding of sweatshops and help us a little bit understand what her coalition is particularly involved with at this point in time. And we have our legislative issues on our website, citing some of the legislative pieces that are already in motion and some that we're hoping to put into motion on our website under labor. Welcome, Joanne, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. You're going to have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Good.
Thank you for inviting us. So just by way of introduction, NMAS, National Mobilization Against Sweatshops, is a worker center based in New York City. And we're a membership organization of all different kinds of workers. So restaurant workers, nail salon, home care workers, construction, day laborers, and full-time grandmothers. And so the idea is we come together to stand up against the exploitation that we face on the job or in the community where we live. And we are also part of a statewide coalition called SWEAT Coalition, Securing Wages Earned Against Theft. And actually the New York State Council of Churches is part of that coalition as well. And I'm joined here by a few of my colleagues who are also organizing in Buffalo and New York City. And so maybe in the discussion we can all participate. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of issues that we think are quite critical for working people right now. And as Faith mentioned, one is wage theft. Wage theft is running rampant in New York. The estimates are that before the pandemic, about $1 billion was being stolen from workers in the form of wage theft. This is more than all the other forms of theft combined. like burglaries and car thief, but it's largely ignored by the public, by elected officials. And so it's become basically a way of business in this state. And it's a crime. It's a crime. It means that workers are not being paid minimum wage, or not being paid overtime, or not being paid for all the hours they work, or maybe their tips are being misappropriated. And it's happening to workers in all kinds of industries, and including the essential workers who've been working throughout this pandemic. In fact, wage theft we see has gotten even worse during the pandemic. So the reason that this is happening is because basic labor law cannot be enforced. There are loopholes in the law that right now allow unscrupulous employers to get away with wage theft. And the reason is even when workers come forward to file complaints at the Department of Labor or file lawsuits, there's enough time for unscrupulous employers to shut down their businesses, often reopening under a new name, transferring their assets to their family members, declaring bankruptcy. And so that by the time the case is resolved, they say, I have no money. And so we have so many workers who have a piece of paper, a judgment from federal court saying you're owed this amount of money because of wage theft, and they can't collect. There's no money at the end of the day. And this only encourages more wage theft because you can get away with it. So this, we feel, is an urgent problem to address because it's led to so much more poverty and homelessness. And it renders basic increases in minimum wage meaningless for a lot of workers. So for instance, even with proposals to increase the wages in home care, like with the fair pay, it has to be coupled with enforcement because so many workers are not getting the current minimum wage. And so we have a piece of legislation that is going to be reintroduced this year to address this. It's the SWEAT bill, Securing Wages Earned Against Theft. And it's number A766 and S2762. And what this bill would do is help to stop wage theft by giving workers tools to collect their money. Basically giving us the chance to put a lien on property until the resolution of the case so that there's money there at the end of the day. And so we're just talking about so that the minimum wage, overtime, basic laws can be enforced. And it's not adding any extra burden to businesses. In fact, it helps honest businesses because right now, if you're a business trying to comply with the law, you're undermined by these law-breaking businesses who cheat their workers because they can then charge less than you. And so it's very difficult for honest businesses to survive in this atmosphere. While wage theft affects all kinds of workers in all different industries, it runs rampant in the home care industry. So we're organizing a lot of home care workers it's home care that's funded by Medicaid, especially, that we're seeing. And these agencies across the board are systematically stealing wages from home care workers. And these are agencies that are unionized, not unionized. And what is happening is that workers who are made to work 24-hour shifts are paid only 13 of those hours. Even though the state law says that if you work a 24-hour shift, if you do not get at least 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep and 3 hours of uninterrupted break, you should be paid for all 24 hours. However, that's not happening. Even when workers report the hours, they're either ignored or they're threatened or they're retaliated against for reporting those hours. And so you can imagine if in every 24-hour shift, 11 of those hours are not paid or stolen from you, that amounts to a lot of money. And by one of our estimates, in one of the cases where we're organizing the workers at the Chinese American Planning Council, which is a leader in this industry and the practices of avoiding the wage laws, we estimate that in the last 10 years, CPC stole about 90 million from the home care workers. We're not talking about overtime pay. We're talking about just the number of hours not paid. And so maybe many of you know that people who require round-the-clock care at home do so for a reason, because they need attention at night. Maybe they need assistance going to the bathroom, or they need to have their Pampers changed, or they need to be turned over every 2 hours, or they have Alzheimer's. There are reasons, right, that one would need 24-hour care. And so we're saying two things about this. One is that workers should be paid, like, for all that work that was done. And second is that the 24-hour shift has got to stop. So first, going back to the wage theft, there is another law that is called the Home Care Worker Wage Parity Act, which says that only agencies that comply with the law, labor laws, can receive state funding, public funding. And so a lot of these agencies, like the one I mentioned to you, CPC, do not comply. They are in violation of, they don't pay for all the hours worked, they don't pay proper overtime, all these things, yet they are receiving Medicaid funding. So it's very problematic that our public funds are being used in this exploitative way. And so one of the calls to elected officials is for enforcement of the law, like to enforce the Home Care Worker Wage Parity Act and withhold funds, public funds, to agencies that refuse to comply with the basic labor law. Beyond the wage question in home care, as Faith mentioned, long hours, you can't get longer than 24 hours in a day. And so it just seems really shameful that our country, like a century and a half after so many workers took to the streets in this country demanding an 8-hour day. Do you remember 8-hour day? 8 hours to work, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours to do as you will, right? So we could have a life. Now we have the government saying it's okay to work 24 hours. And I have to say, we see so many home care workers whose physical and mental health has been destroyed by years of working these 24-hour shifts, their family relations also. And it's not good for those that they care for either, because, when you're sleep deprived and stressed, it's hard to provide proper care, and many accidents happen. And that's why we're calling for the end to the 24-hour workday. And the fact that it's mainly women of color and immigrants doing this work, it makes us feel like, is that the reason why it's sanctioned by the state? It's racist. And so that's another call that we encourage everyone to please bring to elected officials, that the 24-hour workday has got to stop. It's not only bad for patients and those they care for, but it's bad for all workers, because it means there's no bottom for any of us. So those three things: pass the sweat bill, pass the bill to end the 24-hour workday, which is A 3145 S 359, and enforce the Home Care Worker Wage Parity Act. So thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And I was going to connect you with some of the issues that Maurice is involved in, but I see Maurice has kind of left. I don't know whether he's within hearing distance or not, but Maurice, are you available? Yes, I'd like to introduce Maurice Lowry. He's from the Service Employees Union International, I-99, right here in New York State. And he has a lot of folks for whom he's working and organizing around some of those same areas. So maybe Maurice, you could fill us in on some of your concerns.
Hi, everybody. I was here. I just had my camera off for a minute. I was kind of, doing other things, but I was listening though. Hello, my name is Maurice Lowry. I am a political organizer for 1199 SEIU. Thank you for inviting me onto this panel to give you some ideas of what our home care workers have been going through. As Nancy said, we have been fighting for our home care workers for fair pay. Over the last, I'd say, 5 months. Well, actually, we started before that. We started with the Build Back Better, lobbying our legislators for the Build Back Better. As we know, that kind of fell to the table. So we started lobbying locally between our Assemblymen and New York State senators as well. So the issues with the fair pay is that at least 17% 17 to 20% of the home care jobs are unfilled right now, which puts a lot of stress on the caregivers there for home care, for disabilities, for seniors and disabilities, which can really devastate the home care industry over the next, I'd say, 6 years. At least 980,000 positions would need to be filled by 2028, which is very devastating to that kind of that industry, home-based industry, which also brings back, as Ron said earlier, as I was listening to Ron and Dee, an economic, disparity, because it's mostly brown, Latino, and immigrants who do these jobs and who are not paid a fair wage. We also are involved in the 15. Fight for 15. A lot of our workers do only make at least like $11.13 an hour to $10 an hour working home care. They work long, strenuous hours. They also travel a lot as well, from home to home, different homes, caring for our patients that are at our home. So we're really fighting for, guaranteed wages, guaranteed hours, accessible to family sustaining wages, meaning that, if they have to take a day off, they could still get paid for taking that day off to take care of their families or themselves. Because if our workers are sick, they cannot help, their patients or the communities, the communities they serve. So we're really out there fighting for that. And we would also like our clergy to, the fair pay bill is A66329 in the Assembly right now, and the Senate is 5374A. Okay, so please support that bill. Our home care workers are out there. They're doing everything they can. They've gone to Washington to lobby so far. We have just recently did a Hands Around the Capitol. We actually made a heart in the Capitol of Albany this Monday on Valentine's Day to lobby for the Fair Pay Act. So we're doing a multitude of things. We had a big rally in New York City in, let me see, hold on. I believe that was in September. We had at least 3,000 members out to rally for fair pay or home care. It was a great rally. It went off without a hitch. And we also had a few Assembly members and senators come down to our Hands Around the Capitol in Albany to promote support for the bill. And also Reverend Peter Cook also spoke to our membership down there. So we're really encouraging, the clergy to please jump on board and help our members out, and also, other, workers, sweatshop workers and everything for the Fair Pay Act. Anything?
Yes,
any questions or anything?
Thank you very much, Maurice. Richard, I'd just like to introduce you. This is Reverend Richard Witt, who is the Episcopal Church Executive Director. He's with the Episcopal Church. He's the Executive Director of the Rural and Migrant Ministry. He's the Migrant and Rural Ministries are a statewide organization since 1981, a non-for-profit organization that stands proudly with rural and migrant communities throughout the state. Their work focuses on the creation of a just rural New York State by developing leadership, standing with disenfranchised, especially the farm workers and rural workers, and for changing unjust systems and structures. So Richard, I'm glad that you'll be able to hear with us this afternoon, or we know you also have an hours issue.
Thank you so much, sister, and greetings to everybody. Thank you for being a part of this very valuable panel. I'm going to begin by reminding us all that we are all in relationship with New York's farm workers because they are feeding us and nourishing us, and an integral part of $5 billion+ a year industry. So they're a valuable part of our economy also. I want to go back for a moment though and talk about our relationship, and then I'll bring you up to date about where things stand right now with farm workers in New York State. The agricultural workers in New York go all the way back to the beginning of the founding of New York. You know, New York has always been an agricultural state, and in the early days of New York, those agricultural workers were enslaved people to a large degree. At one point, New York had the second largest slave market in the United States. And a lot of those workers ended up, especially in the Hudson Valley in those early years, in Dutchess County. So New York has long depended upon labor that was not paid or paid substandard, has lived in the midst of bad conditions, unfair conditions, harsh conditions. And as time went on, things changed a bit, obviously. And in the 1930s, President Roosevelt and the Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins, both good Episcopalians, I might add, were trying to improve working conditions for laborers across the country. And they wanted to institute such things as a day of rest and overtime pay and the right to bargain collectively. And a group of Southern senators and Congress people said, you need our vote, but we're not going to give you our vote if you include the farm workers and also the domestic workers, because we can't have people of color being treated the same as people who are white. And so President Roosevelt agreed to that deal, and farm workers got excluded from those basic rights. Fast forward to the 1990s, and a group of farm workers arrived in Albany to testify about working and living conditions, and discovered that they were excluded from those basic rights, and also heard that the Senate didn't really care about farm workers because they had no political voice. And that's when Rural and Migrant Ministry got involved, along with many other wonderful organizations, to add our voice to the voice of the farm workers so that they could be heard. That then led to a 20+ year campaign, the Justice for Farm Workers campaign, that finally in 2019 saw the passage of the Farm Laborers Practice Act that gave farm workers in New York State many of the rights that were denied them all these years. Truly a moment of systemic change. Unfortunately, there was a piece of that legislation that could not get through, and that was denying farm workers the same overtime threshold as other laborers. So the overtime threshold kicked in at 60 hours rather than 40 hours. And finally, this current session that we find ourselves in, the wage board that was set up to examine whether the overtime threshold should be lowered has recommended that the overtime threshold be lowered over the next 10 years from 60 to 40. And we're in a process right now of waiting to see that be approved. No guarantee that it's going to be approved. I hold up all of that history to remind us that our brothers and sisters who labor in the fields are not easily seen. You know, rural New York is vast and hidden. And to remind us that we need to take the steps to see our brothers and sisters, to acknowledge them, to honor them, to pray for them, and to stand with them when their voices are being squashed. One way that this can happen is as a result of the farm worker bill. There are wonderful union organizing efforts led by the United Food and Commercial Workers Union and the RWDSU, the Retail Workers Department Store Union, and they are working with farm workers to form unions in New York. And the first farm worker union actually came into being a few months ago at the Pindar Vineyards on Long Island. And hopefully this will be an inspiration to other workers across the state to join in bargaining collectively for the rights. Along that way, they will need allies from the faith and labor communities and the academic communities to stand with them because there's an awful lot of pressure against their unionizing. So there are things going on always in the legislature. There are things that are going on in our own communities. There are things going on even in our own farmers markets. So I urge people to be aware, to see the farm workers, and to question your local food systems and your local legislators about how they are seeing and honoring our brothers and sisters who feed us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And I think you bring to mind that some of us may not be fully aware that we're talking about food chain workers. I know the farm workers are probably the beginning of the chain. And I don't think anywhere in the northern New York State area we have any efforts yet towards unionizing. I work with the Worker Justice Center up here and across the northern areas of the state. It seems to be an issue that's kind of threatening, and I'm trying to see if I can get someone on this side of the river, because the center that I work with is over in Kingston, but try to get somebody on the Albany side of the river who can work over here on the eastern side to try to help some of these, particularly the dairy workers. They're in a terrible situation with probably no protection at all. They're not even covered by the H2a visa. Not that that would be a great help to them, because most of the farmers with whom I spoke, and I've been working on farm worker issues since the early 2000s. I grew up with farm workers. My brothers were part of the FFA, Future Farmers of America group. There's just a real lack of understanding of, as you mentioned, the need to help those folks who really don't have any way to access any assistance for the most part, unless they have someone like Cesar Chavez or Valdemir Vadquez, and we don't have anybody in New York State who comes from those groups, the United Farm Workers and the flock workers who are now finally united, to help that effort to move forward. So that's a big issue. Not that we're going to get involved in that, because we're really working on the legislative pieces. At this point, though, I would like to open. Here, did you find? Yes. Did you? Yes. Did you find?
Yeah. Before we take more questions, Richard Kubek from Jobs for Justice is here, and I wanted to know, Richard, if you could speak to the question of the Excluded Workers Fund. That'd be great. That is part of our legislative ask, $3 billion ask for excluded workers. Richard.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for Long Island Jobs with Justice, and we're part of the state campaign that you heard this morning from The Economist, the extraordinary win last year. We got $2.1 billion, that's with a B, for undocumented immigrants who were getting no COVID assistance, even though they lost income fully or in part. Anyway, to the shock of everyone, including the state, which just released a report in January saying even the state was shocked, that fund was depleted in 9 weeks. $2.1 billion committed in 9 weeks. And the shocking part was that it was in 2 tiers. One tier was for $15,600 one-time payment. The other tier, tier 2, was for $3,200. And the tier you got into depended upon the documents you were able to provide to show that you lost income. 99.4%, the last time I looked, of the awards went to people who in the tier 1, 15,600, because they had ITIN numbers, or they had W-2s, or they had letters from their employer saying I had to lay off Richard Kubek and blah, blah, blah. Just give an example of Long Island. The Fiscal Policy Institute had done an analysis of each region and how many workers would have qualified. And so for Long Island, Nassau and Suffolk counties, they estimated 35,000 undocumented workers would have qualified. 7,000 got into the system, 7,000. So 28,000 did not. And all of the 24,000 who would have been in the second tier, you know, mainly, we know who they are, cash workers, day laborers, they got nothing. So we've come back with 2 proposals. One is that 3 billion more be placed in. And Peter, I have to say the price of admission for your program, which was $0, was excellent, because I actually sent a message to all of my colleagues based on the answer I got this morning that there may be hidden in one of the budget lines the money that we need. No one is talking about it. We're really having a hard time getting commitments, but the speaker this morning said, looks like it may get done quietly through this fund. So that's great. I hope that's true. Anyway, so that's the first ask, 3 billion more. The second ask is a permanent fix, because cash workers, whether you're a documented immigrant, an undocumented immigrant, or a US citizen, can't get in. For example, I remember seeing a Facebook post last year when we were all shut down, and somebody said, if you have a housekeeper and you're afraid that the housekeeper, might give you COVID and you've laid that person up, would you please keep paying that person? Those kinds of cash workers got nothing and get nothing and can never get anything. So the second ask is a permanent fix that's called the Excluded No More bill. And this would provide a mechanism. It would be a separate fund from unemployment insurance paid for from general revenue that would allow cash workers, no matter what your legal status, to access some funding, unemployment compensation, when you lose work. So those are the 2 asks. I really was pleased this morning, because we were very disappointed that the governor has said nothing about either of these. So I really hope your speaker this morning had his finger on the pulse, but like Paul Revere, I sent the word out. There's hope. That's
we should ask the governor to include this in the budget, or is it too late?
We have asked, and we haven't gotten any commitments until this morning. That the speaker said that there may be a very large fund for pandemic relief, and there may be 2 billion already in there for this purpose. I really, really hope. A lot of faith people on the line here today, so I really hope that gets done.
Thank you very much.
Regards to Richard Witt too, by the way. Congratulations on your Long Island win in Pindar. That's fabulous. We're going to honor the workers in the spring. Fabulous.
Yes, you're right down there where you can do that on Long Island. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I would like to open this up to our viewers. If they would like to ask questions, I would ask you, since we're a small group, if you would please use the raise your hand down in the reactions, down where you will find the reactions button at the bottom of your screen there on the right-hand side. Then we can all see you, and we'll be able to hear you also.
And if you could just ask questions, not make, short questions so that we have time to get to everybody. So.
Right.
All right.
Richard, do you have a question? Yes, Ravi.
Richard or Dick, how has, I believe there is a lot of new visas for workers, farm workers. How do you think that is going to impact the farm workers in New York State, or does it have an impact, or what are the negative consequences of that? Because I heard you mention, problems with work permits, but with the focus on this, what would it mean?
Thank you for asking that question. I think one of the difficulties historically is with what is known as the guest worker program. The government name is called the H2a Program, and it was set up to provide farms with workers when they couldn't find what they called domestic workers. And it was meant to be temporary. Where you've seen it really play out in New York is in the apples, where a lot of Jamaican workers, but also Mexican and Haitian workers come, and they arrive. They have to go to a specific farm for a specific amount of time. And if things don't go well on that farm, they can't change farms. And so they're very vulnerable about not wanting to rock the boat for fear that they wouldn't get selected, because usually it's like a whole application process back in their home country. So the difficulty, especially during the pandemic, right, is that a lot of farms are having trouble finding workers. But farms are also historically have had trouble finding workers because of the really difficult working conditions and finding people who want to work for under those difficult situations. So the farmers and the Farm Bureau have really been pushing hard in recent years to get these guest workers in, to expand their numbers, and to also get them into year-round efforts like dairy. I mean, dairy is a major farming industry in New York State. The more that they can get workers that are H2a workers, the more control they have over their workers' lives. So there's a balance there between filling these positions, of which, of course, the whole national immigration discussion over the past number of years has also limited people coming. When I first started working at Rural and Migrant Ministry, people were migrating between Mexico and the United States. They didn't want to live here. They wanted to go back home. Now nobody's really migrating except for these guest workers. And so I think this is the farm industry's effort to try to plug a hole.
Yes, Haya, do you have a question? You'll have to there you go.
My question is for Maurice. I'm just thinking about some of the things that were said today. I was wondering, obviously 150% minimum wage increase would be great, $22. But I'm wondering, how will the Fair Pay for Home Care Workers Act ensure that home attendants who are working the 24-hour shifts actually receive the wage increases that they so rightly deserve, rather than just, increasing the profits for the home care agencies as they pocket even more of home attendants' wages. I was reading in the legislative acts. I think this is on the economic development section, so I'm sorry if this is not your section. But for Fair Pay for Home Care, it was saying that it would lift over 200,000 home care workers out of poverty wages. And that would be wonderful, but I'm wondering, and I'm slightly concerned, is like, does this number account for the systematic wage theft experienced by home attendants working 24-hour shifts? Would home attendants working 24-hour shifts, how do we make sure that they benefit from this minimum wage increase, given that we know how systematic this wage theft is in the industry?
Well, there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can do that by organizing, getting our legislators together to create a law that prevents this 24-hour working, schedule. There are already labor laws out there that should. There's already labor laws out there that should be preventing that from happening, but they're not enforced. So the way we can do that is by lobbying, legislating, unionizing, shops, non-union shops as well, to get a better contract for extra days off, being guaranteed wages, guaranteed hours, no more than 8-hour shifts. So that is work in progress, but together we can get through this, and we can work together to make sure that these kind of things doesn't happen. As you know, the pandemic has exposed a lot of the healthcare industry, especially home care. And these are things that we are aware of, but now everyone else is aware of as well. So through fighting with our coalition partners and things like that, we will work on legislation to prevent that from happening in the future.
Thank you, Maurice. Joanne.
Hi, thank you. I guess it's maybe related to the previous question. But right now, I guess, as I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of violation of the current labor law, whether it's minimum wage in general or in the home care industry, the law that says that you are entitled to 24 hours pay if you don't get at least 5 hours of sleep and 3 hours meal break. And in addition, there's a law in the books that says that you shouldn't receive public funding if you break these laws, but then all these laws don't seem to be heeded, you know what I mean? Like, which is so worrisome, because it makes you feel like you make laws, but then there's no enforcement. And then, so then it's just there in the books, but then in people's lives, when you look at what's really happening to people, it's not a reality. And so I guess I have a question for participants too. I mean, do you think that this is right, that our public funds should go towards funding, towards employers, agencies that violate the labor law? Because that's what's happening in home care. And with all due respect, Maurice, some of the agencies where we've been organizing the workers for the wage theft are 1199 unionized. We just see it, it's all different kind of agencies happening.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm just going to call on Richard since he seems to want to respond to that. I'll be with you, Reverend Victoria, next. Thank you.
I was going to ask a related question, because we had funding through the Excluded Workers Fund to help people to get into the fund. And when it was gone, believe it or not, the state allowed us to use our funding to create sort of procedures for workers to access their rights. So that got me into putting together a manual, and we're going to train folks to sort of go with workers to assert their rights, like wage theft. I was amazed at how many rights there are on the books. Once I sat and put it all together, it's like an 8-page manual. It was, good Lord, I didn't know about all of this. But my question is, and I'm beginning to hear the answer, are they enforced? And my core question is, where is the Department of Labor? Does it really stay on top of all of these wonderful rights, or are they just on paper? And it's up to us to sort of do what we're going to do, escort people to wherever, you know. I don't know who, one of the panelists want to answer that, but
I think
is the
you bring up-
DOL cooperating with all of this or no?
I think you bring up a very important point, because I worked alongside a U.S. Department labor person from the Department of Labor, who told me that she left the department because she was a meat inspector, and she said she had so many plants to inspect that she could not fit them within the time frame that they were to be done. And so what she was highlighting was the fact was there was an overload and a lack of employees to help oversight, enforcement, and accountability. Those are the areas that are most weak in a lot of legislative pieces that we have. So I'll just leave that there, because I want Reverend Victoria to have an opportunity to ask her question also, or make a comment. So please do so. Thank you. Yes. We can't hear you, Dr. Victoria. You'll have to speak louder. You're muted.
I'm going to put on my headset. I think you'll hear better. Okay.
Sure.
Go on to another question. I'm happy to wait my turn.
Could I just follow up?
Can I just jump in? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to add to what Dick was raising. I do think that we as advocates and the public need to focus more on enforcement. And it's easy for us and important for us to get caught up in passing legislation and pushing for regulations. It's also very important for us to develop campaigns around enforcement, because the governmental entities aren't, as we heard, staffed well enough. There are pressures against them for enforcing. And this is a critical piece of the whole seeking of justice.
Very good point.
If I may interject for a second, as a union organizer, we're all, and this has come up recently with our members as well, and meetings that we've had with our members, and how they feel and what we need to do to keep enforcing labor laws and short staffing, things like that. We need to also hold our legislators' feet to the fire. We need to, if we come out and support you and elect you and things like that, and you say you're going to do something and that task is not carried through, we need to call you out on that. Voters vote, right? People vote, communities vote. We try to let our members know that if we go out and we canvass and we interact for the community, for this legislator who has made a promise for labor or community, and they don't hold their, and we don't hold their feet to the fire for that. I'm sorry, excuse me. And we need to start holding their feet to the fire. We need to contact them. We need to follow through, not just let them sit there and be like, I'm in this office now, I can do what I want to do. That's not how it works. So we really need to hold our elected officials accountable for what they say and what they say they're going to do.
Yes, thank you, Maurice. Dr. Victoria, do you think you can get in here now?
Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you to all the presenters and moderator. Very, very wonderful, inspirational words to us. My question is this. I've worked for a long time now with people who have experienced interpersonal violence and human trafficking. And I know there is always a disparity between access to help and funding for women and men in rural settings. And certainly, for example, you couldn't even make a police report if you didn't have a permanent address. I've seen ads by lawyers advertising their services, but it's of course for a fee. And I'm wondering how much has been changed. Violence against women, particularly interpersonal violence and human trafficking, they're both pandemics within the pandemic. And I wonder how you have found in your wonderful efforts to work on labor justice has been impacted, and any specific remedies that we can know that we can support. Thank you.
That's a tough one. I would just like to also allow Mary an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I do want to go back to the question about enforcement. I think that's a really good point that was brought up by Richard. And the sweat bill is one of the bills that Joanne and other members of our sweat coalition are here asking folks to support today. Sweat stands for Securing Wages Earned Against Theft. And it really would take some of the bureaucracy out of the enforcement for labor law. It would allow a worker who has experienced wage theft to go and place a lien on the employer's assets until such time as the court could be decided about the wage theft complaint. And so it would really make it a lot easier for workers to hold their bosses accountable, because right now a lot of the bosses are able to just, as Joanne has mentioned, just move their assets during the amount of time it takes to do the court. So I really think that that's an important piece in terms of the enforcement. And I also want to add that we've talked with folks. So this is not a direct answer to your question to Reverend Victoria, but we have talked with a number of experts in human trafficking, and it's really disturbing, the parallels between human trafficking and the 24-hour workday. Most of the women working these shifts are immigrant women or women of color who are born here, and they enter the job under false conditions, under false pretexts, that they'll work these 24 hours and be paid accordingly. And as you guys have mentioned, even under the current law, which is not strong enough, the workers are supposed to be paid for all 24 hours if they're not able to sleep or get their meal breaks. And systemically, that has not happened. The report about CPC that was put out by Ron Kim's office is over 100 pages telling you exactly how that did not happen. And so I would say, in not a direct answer to your question, but related, I think that ending the 24-hour workday is really important to, make sure that everybody is being treated with that respect and being able to come to work under the correct pretenses and have what they were told that they'd have.
Thank you, Mary. Richard, did you have something you wanted to add? I guess not. Well, we have a little less than 5 minutes left here, I think, for our discussion. And I just wanted to thank particularly our resource persons who came to join us and give us a lot of information on the specific legislative pieces that the council is also holding up for us to advocate and lobby with our representatives. And that particular information is in the packet that you received, which I know looks like a doctoral dissertation. However, all of the legislative pieces are there with their numbers. And I hope that you will be available to join us in the visits that will be set up through our council. If you cannot, however, please contact your legislators personally, either by email or otherwise, phone call. Just develop a few talking points from the information that is there available on our website. And we hope to see you. And Peter, did you have something that you wanted to add to this ending? You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, again, we really want you, in speaking with legislators, to really focus on the inequality that we're really trying to address in New York in all of its forms, and then to focus on 2 or 3 issues that are close to you and that you think would be good to talk to a legislator about, but they always have this larger legislative ask to refer to. It's kind of a guidebook, if you will, to advocacy around so many of these progressive issues, and hope that will be a good resource for them and for you. Joanne, did you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to mention 2 quick things if I could.
Yeah,
No.
please. Yeah.
One, I just wanted to respond to what Richard raised about the enforcement question and the Department of Labor. One thing to add on about wage theft and the Department of Labor is that when we've met with them in the past, they have also said that they wish they had tools to collect. So they face the same problem as workers do, whether they go to court or whatever for their wage claims, that they can come down with a decision, but then the money is gone, hidden. And so that's why SWEAT would also be a tool, an enforcement tool for the Department of Labor as well to collect. The second thing I just wanted to mention in response to Victoria, and I appreciate her raising this, the question of the violence against women, because I think that there is a lot of violence against women in so many forms in our country, and so much of it is happening on a daily basis that is not seen as readily because it's not like a brutal, at the moment, kind of physical thing that happens. And I think what Mary was alluding to about the 24-hour workday is that it's a kind of violence that is over time. Like when I hear the women talk about it, it's like your life is drained away from you, like day by day. It's like you lose track of time. You lose sense that you have a life, because when things happen in your life, whether it's an emergency with your kid or your mother passes away, you can't leave. You can't leave until a replacement comes. And you're often there. Your shift is 24 hours for days. And then if there's no replacement, you're there. It's as if nothing else matters. And so what that does to someone's psyche is something that people have talked about, that they have no more sense of a life, really. And even after they retire, it's kind of like a sense of loss. So I think that really stopping this 24-hour workday is really critical to reaffirm that this kind of violence, we recognize this as a form of violence, and it's got to stop.
Thank you so much for helping us focus on the dignity and respect we owe one another as we live together here on this earth. Thank you for all of you who have been here with us.